think perhaps for some of you who are joining us, it might well be evening, because I know we've got people from all around the world who have signed up to this seminar. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Julie Mills, the Chief Executive of the Milton Keynes College Group, and I'm really delighted to be hosting this book launch this evening. And I think we're going for a really interesting conversation with the author of the book, and hopefully a really interesting dialogue as well with you who are attending the session tonight. So the launch is being brought to you with the support of a number of organisations: the South Central Institute of Technology, Milton Keynes College, the Milton Keynes Business Partners Leadership, and Women Leaders UK. And I know that everyone in those organisations is really, really pleased to be part of this, the launch of the really exciting new work from Susan Popoola, Male Perspectives and the Value of Women in the Workplace. It's Susan's third book, as many of you know, and I think it really is an enlightening piece, a very different piece of work, and something which, if you haven't read it yet, I do urge you to read. And I hope this evening gives you a bit of a taster of that, because it really does shed a different light on a subject that a number of us have been working on for many years. Some housekeeping before we get into it. This is intended to be a conversation, and we do want to have a dialogue with you tonight. We're on a Zoom webinar. I hope that everyone is comfortable with Zoom techniques these days, but please do use the question and answer function to put down your comments, your questions. And about halfway through the discussion between Susan and Antonia, we're going to have a Q&A session. So if you see something that someone else has written and you really like it, do use the little thumbs up symbol to show that you like it, and I'll try and draw on those which are kind of attracting most attention or are most popular. And we are expecting some of the participants, some of the interviewees in the book to be online tonight. So I'm really interested to hear from you, any thoughts, any reflections, why you think it's important that you support this particularly significant agenda. So do engage on the chat and get involved in this evening's session. So on with the main event. Susan is described by many as an award-winning consultant specialising in talent management, inclusion and engagement, a community activist with a deep-rooted belief in and passion for human value. And I think those of us that have had the great good fortune to know and work with Susan over the years would say that that's a description that we absolutely recognise. The Value of Women is Susan's third book, as I've said, and it does provide what I think is a really fresh perspective on this issue of gender equality in the workplace. Fresh because it's about hearing to men's voices. And I don't think I've ever seen anything or been at anything where that has been the focus. And I know, having read the book myself, that I was really quite overwhelmed by the participants that Susan describes as amazing men who have shared really openly and honestly their perspectives. It's a group of men aged 16 to over 70 who have worked around the world, who've got different backgrounds, different sectors, really rich experience. And not only have they shared their experience, they did something which I think was my favourite bit of the book, actually, which was to also share their advice and recommendations. And I think I would say that I was surprised and not surprised, aghast and moved in equal measure. Really fascinating, interesting, powerful stuff. So my thanks to everyone who participated in producing this work too. It opens with a quote from Hillary Clinton, which I thought was really insightful. "In the fight for women's rights, the support of men remains crucial." So actually really understanding the male perspective is essential to us being able to have this dialogue, to take the conversation forward and to improve the situation that we're all working so hard to address. There were 29 interviews, as I said, a really diverse range of participants, and it's the kind of book that you can go for it all in one go, but actually I found it better to dip in, and not necessarily in order. Don't tell Susan that, she might have put it into order very carefully, but I found just dipping into the different perspectives was really, really enjoyable and really thought-provoking. Susan is in conversation this evening with Antonia Maclean, and Antonia is been experienced on the senior boards around the UK and Europe for 30 years. She's a Vistage chair, which means she chairs peer groups of CEOs who come together to work on their most challenging problems. And actually in doing that, her role is part coach, part mentor, part guide, part confident, and part inspiration. So I think, Susan, you are in very good hands tonight, and I can't wait to hear the conversation.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. So, Susan, this remarkable book. It's been a journey just preparing for this session, actually, a really good journey. Like Julie, I've also read your book. Perhaps the right place to start is give us a feel for what this book is about and what was the impetus to write it.
In some ways, Julie has already touched on it in many ways. I'll answer both bits at once. We do know that there are challenges about fairness, inclusion, diversity within the workplace. And a key area is as relates to women. And there are a lot of women who have been working very hard over the years, running programs, supporting women, mentoring women, doing whatever they can to further their progress and to support other women. But there are limits to how much they have been able to do, most especially when you think of the fact that the work environment is still very much controlled, or at least led, by men. That's who it was created for. They still have the prominent position. And that made me think, don't we need to engage with them a bit more? What do they think about women, about what we bring, what we do right, what we could do better, and what can they do to support the journey, and how can we involve them? And that's basically what it's about. And so for me, rather than just sitting down thinking about it, I thought, why not ask them? And that's the starting point, and that's how it basically all ultimately led into discussions, conversations that led into a book.
So, I mean, the remarkable thing about the book is that you've got 28 of your subjects have, I mean, all 29 have willingly taken part. You've got one person that for good reason of age is anonymous, but the other 28 are all named people. We know what their job was. We know whether they're working or not now. It's remarkable in the times of hypersensitivity that you've got, you know, these people coming together on a sensitive subject, talking very personally. How did you bring that about?
I'll answer that from my point of view, and it's possible that some of them might also say why they were open to comment. I think one of the things was there's a diversity in the men, as I said. They almost form a mosaic in their own right. There are some of them that I know, and based on my knowledge of them, I know some of them have a direct focus on women in their work. Like there's Sam, who is, together with his wife, they run Women for Africa. There's someone else, Ryan, who does work around women in the States. So there are people like that whereby you think it's obvious, speak to them. There are other people that, having met them and had conversations for them, I just had an instinct that this would be a good person to speak to. And I shared my brief with them, and they said they're happy to talk. There are others that were recommended by people, such as there's someone like Chris. I happened to have a conversation with his daughter, and she said, you need to speak to my dad. There are other people that recommended people, together with the people that I interviewed, that said, do you want someone else to speak to? I think you should speak to that person. And it was really just reaching out to them And me, I will say, being in the privileged position of having them respond openly and honestly.
Did you have anyone that didn't want to take part?
3 people.
Right.
So 2 people I sent messages to and didn't get a response. I'll just say that they didn't find my email got lost. And another person who just took the time to think about it and thought, I'm not the right person for this. But everyone else that I spoke to did participate. There was one person who I did interview, but for organizational reasons, we weren't able to include his contribution, but everyone else I spoke to is there.
Yeah. I'd like to take you to the account that you chose to place last in the book, which is, you've called him Simon and he's 16 years old. I'm interested to know what it was about Simon's interview that made you want to place it at the end of the book.
Aside from the fact that, as you might notice, just you mentioning him brings a big smile to my face. I started with Tarek, and I specifically started with Tarek because he provided a whole systems review, creating an awareness that actually, if we really want to bring about proper change, we need to look at the whole system, from family to the workplace to the political setup to everything. So that was a natural starting point, followed by Sam, who's the man in his 70s, who could say this is what it was like once upon a time. This is how he sees things having changed. Simon, as I said, he's 16 years old.
So he's at school?
He's in school.
Yeah.
His only experience of the workplace was work placement for a few weeks. But he was able to talk extensively about what happens in the family, where we can be conditioned to education, conditioning that we have in terms of you're a girl, this is what you do, this is a boy, that even though we have people coming into schools talking about girls in STEM, and we have some initiatives like that, it's still limited, such that for him, he thought 30 years time, things wouldn't change much at the pace that we're going. So for me, it was the perfect way to conclude that this is a young man talking about what he sees, and he is a deep thinker. He analyzed things. I didn't push him. I just prompted him and he spoke. And if he sees that this is where we still are, and we're only likely to have made so much progress, it says to me, this is just the beginning of the conversation. The conversation needs to continue, and there's much to be done.
Yes, I'm sort of interested to what, you know, I don't know how long the whole project took you. How long did it, how long was the period of time between start and finish? It's
funny enough, it's very much a project of lockdown, because in the early weeks of lockdown, I guess we're sort of paused a bit and thinking, what do we do now? And that's when I really started thinking about it and shared a few thoughts with 1 or 2 people, and that helped crystallize my thinking that yes, let's do it. And so reached out.
What would you say, what happened to you during that journey? Did you find, what happened to your views, your ideas about the value of women at work through a male perspective? What happened to you?
There was a lot of deep reflection for me. I mean, there was like a wow and an oh. There were a lot of wows. I mean, wows in terms of this is what you see, how you see us, generalizing, to be clear, because we are different. this is what you see we're bringing. You do see the value in us. Some of you, I don't quite see it that way, but that's what you think. That's a good starting point. And there were a lot of wows, both wows and ohs with that. It also led me to think inwardly about myself as well. And there was a role that I was thinking of applying for, which I might have discounted myself from because I didn't meet one or two of the criteria points. But having spoken to people, I thought, go for it. So I guess even for me, it's had an immediate effect. And getting to that stage from the conversations, it almost became an imperative for me to share, because I thought, I'm learning from this. I have a greater awareness. It would be wrong for me not to share that with other people, male and female alike.
Yeah. I mean, Sam Crooks, you mentioned him, he's like your the second person placed in the book. He talks about the importance of language, which again, in these funny times we're living in, you know, language, putting a foot wrong with language, just, you know, you can end up in a very uncomfortable place. And I was wondering whether, you know, what was your experience of the way that some of the example men in your book were, the way that they chose their words? Did you feel that sensitivity?
To some extent, yes. And the reason why I say to some extent is I can't say how much they were thinking about it, but I will say I wasn't overly focused on it.
Right.
For me, it was more about who you are and what you have to say. I did speak to every one of them. I looked into their eyes as I was speaking, had a focused conversation. And I am confident that they were not only open and honest, but they all had good intent with with what they had to say. So language is important, but for me, it was more important to hear what they had to say, knowing that they were coming from a positive place, with the view that that is just the beginning of the conversation.
I mean, this is the clever thing about the book, isn't it? Because I certainly found, as a female, reading some of the conversations, I felt quite uncomfortable. You know, it's sort of, it's you know, frustration. But the thing that I thought was really valuable was that actually, because I wasn't a live part of the conversation, I'm actually able to reflect on what this person is saying, because this person's starting point is, you know, is to be interested, deeply interested in the value of women in the workplace. So reading it rather than having the live conversation meant that I was able to reflect on that, and I was able to reflect on why it irritated me, what, you know, put back the positive intent. You know, that felt like a really unusual gift in this book, actually. I mean, have you got some advice for people reading the book, how to read the book, how to get value out of it in that way?
Don't rush it. After each conversation that I had, I went away. I mean, the normal thing that I do is I go into a meeting, I finish the meeting, what's next? Get on with it. The depth of the conversations that I had meant that I had to pause, to take time to take in what was said before I went on to the next thing. And even in terms of having completed the interviews, it took me more time thinking about pulling it together and how to pull it together, making sure I maintained the integrity of what they had to say, than the interviews themselves. So that took a long time, plus going to them to say, are you happy with it? So it's a reflective piece. And as I said, there are the ohs and the ums, and as you said, the frustrations and the grurs that you might get from reading it. But when you have that, I'd say pause. What's the intention? Where are they coming from? Where are they in their journey? What has shaped their thinking? Someone else who has read it said it's great to have the bios, because having the bios meant that you were able to see that person's journey and where they were coming from to that point. So, I mean, for anybody reading, I would say take your time. Don't just rush through it. Don't immediately respond. You do have that opportunity, because you're not in the room, to be able to take the time and really think about what's the intent of this comment. And
absolutely. I think that's good advice. I mean, I really do think that's a way that the book can work. You have got several contributions from people who I am assuming are Black, Asian, possibly mixed race. I don't know, it's not stated in the book, I'm guessing a bit here, but you've certainly got, you know, a variety of cultural backgrounds. Do you think that the cultural context or the race is the most significant influence on the thoughts of the participant about the value of women in work?
not necessarily. I mean, you know, I mean, I talk about the mosaic. Everything I do is about the mosaic, that rich diversity. And when we talk of diversity, there's diversity within diversity. So each person of color, just as each white person, has a different experience and background that has brought them to the place that they're at. And they have different manners or ways in which they view the world. And so the same applies to the men that I spoke to, who are, as you said, Asian, who are Black, mixed heritage, and I would add from different parts of the world, because you've got someone in Africa, people born in different places in England that have lived in different parts of the world, people based in Europe, people in the States. So that diversity is very much there. But I think it's fair to say that for the men of color, they typically have a greater awareness of women of color, and it's reflected together with additional challenges that women of color often face. Because when you think about it, they're the barriers that they face as women, and they're the barriers that they face as people of color. And you bring those two together, and that means that there are additional challenges for women of color that they're more aware of, and that they reflect in what they have to say.
Yeah, that's quite profound, isn't it? I think I've seen some of there's a quote, I think, either on your LinkedIn or perhaps some review of the book, which actually underlines that point that you're making. So yeah, I'm just thinking, a final question I'd like to just ask you before we move on and hear from some of the other people that are taking part in this afternoon's session is, can we generalize across the subjects that the guys that you talked to? Did more of them feel that women need to try harder, or that men need to create space, or that, you know, the law needs to change, you know, rules and regs inside organizations need to change? Did you think there was some themes around that?
I think you get a bit of everything, because as I said, the men, all with different experiences and a diversity of perspectives. And dare I say myself, that's one of the great things about it. In fact, you can almost get a contradiction in terms of the things that different people say. So you do have those that believe, well, if you work hard, if you really work hard, then you'll be okay, just continue to work hard. Then you had someone like Thomas Power that says, women don't push. And I had to push him to say, what do you mean by that? And he's talking about visibility. So you have people that there is that thing about women doing more in some form, but then there is also how women do things. I mentioned the example that came up several times, whereby for men, typically, if they're going for a role, 10 competencies. If they can meet 4 or 5, they've done it before, 1 or 2, they think, yeah, I can do that. They go for it. And they say what they have to say for the opportunity to come through. For women, based on the experience of a number, some of them have worked in development centers and seen firsthand. A woman will say, yeah, I've done 8 or 9 of these, but I haven't done this last thing. And they therefore hold back from putting themselves forward. Then, as I mentioned, there are things, there's men's awareness. Someone like Keith mentioned, he talks about the fact that being more mindful, so being conscious, don't just going for the obvious, but looking at who's around you. So there are things like that when it comes to men. And then there are the whole systems and structures that people like Chris talk about, that that people, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, Gamil and a number of other people all talk about the systems and structures that are in place. Like Bill Palmer also talks about the hierarchical nature of organizations, that mean that it's limited, at their limited opportunities at the top. Someone like Rick talks about different types of men, and men that are more likely to engage and are champions, and those that are skeptics, and those that are just not interested on the other end of the spectrum. So that's why it's so rich, and that's why there is the need to just take the time to work through.
Yes, thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Antonia. I think I said at the beginning we wanted this to be a dialogue, even within the limitations of a Zoom webinar. So it's been really great to see your comments coming in, and that first session has certainly given a lot of food for thought, I think, and we've had some really interesting comments from people who are in the book. So some of the stars of the value of women at work. Kahinda has talked about having an aha moment, recognizing that thing about the echo chamber. You know, in the very first chapter talks about somebody going into a conference, an event on women in the workplace, and being the only man in the room. And actually, I think that is a significant thing, isn't it? But going through the book, Susan, did you get any more ideas or thoughts about how we could encourage men and women to talk about this issue together? And how timely do you think that is anyway in the context of other characteristics and other inequalities in the world at the moment?
2 things. One of the things that I have focused on more than ever before, in line with this, is conversations, getting people together to talk about challenges, the problems, how things are from their perspective. And I lead conversations, do a lot more. So I shall mention that. So that is one thing, having the conversations. There's also something about the language that we use, making it clear when events about women are just for women, or people of color, or people, or what have you, but also making it clear when you want other people to join in. We'd love for men to be part of this event, to be engaged in this. I sort of paused when I said part of this event, because key though is when you have such people coming in, it's not so much for them to give their opinion, at least not as a starting point. It's for them to be there to listen, to hear, to understand, ask questions for clarification, and then, should I say, give their opinion as requested, but not as the starting point.
No, I think I think it's a feature that we're starting to see now in 2021 onwards. Maybe this is where dialogue will be broadened out and conversations will be more inclusive in their own right. And maybe that will accelerate the pace of change. Let's be optimistic. Jill has asked a specific question. To what extent overall in the book do you think that the participants, and I know there were lots of different views in the book, but thought that it was about men changing to create a more equal workplace?
I would say it's a combination. I'm not going to give a direct yes or no response to that. It's a combination that the structural changes, fundamentally, the structural changes that need to take place. Then there need to be the changes that come from men, the changes, and a lot of that is about awareness. There are two people, Ped and Julian, that spoke about their journey of awareness and how that is impacting on how they think and react. And I think that is key. Plus that whole leadership and that thing of men understanding what women bring and recognizing that as well. And I will dare to say, we as females, as women, there's some things for us, but I would like us to start off by saying, what can men do? Something I started saying recently is, I'd like us, we talk a lot about women breaking the glass ceiling. That's great. But what if we reach the situation whereby, with men fully appreciating the value we bring, said, actually, let's open the door, or if the door doesn't fit, let's create new doors that work for women.
It's that whole structural piece is really significant, isn't it? I think, and difficult for an individual to see how they can tackle it, but that's why it needs to be the collective. A couple of really interesting points from Gamil and Rob, two participants, about their motivations were very much about celebrating the women in their personal and family lives that have been significant to them, and that was certainly a theme for me that came through the book. A number of the men gave family members, wives, mothers, siblings as key inspiring women in their lives. I've also had a question from Michael, which in doing the research, Susan, did you pick up any differences in the attitudes to women across sectors?
Not that immediately comes to mind, if I'm to be honest. I can say, it's funny, I was just having a conversation with people. There are differences in sectors, but I won't say that that was specifically reflected, if I'm to be honest.
That's interesting, isn't it? I guess we've all got our own backgrounds and our own experiences. Chris, another participant, has apologised, Antonia, if it was him that said anything that offended you, but actually was really making the point that actually, how do we get that out there? If something is, makes us wince, how do we share it? Let's have the dialogue. Let's encourage people to talk and to explain and understand. And I think I got such a sense from reading the book that for all of the participants, this was really that there was no hesitation that this is a challenge and it needs to be addressed. It was just people bringing their different perspectives as to how we might do that. But I'm getting the sense that there's an open door for dialogue and working together on it. Keith has also really praised you, Susan, in this book in terms of your ability to listen and to reflect without judgment, without naming names or kind of things. Were there times when you did find it more difficult to be not judgmental than others?
The nature of me means I'm learning, I'm learning to judge less. I have a friend who has taught me to be curious rather than to judge, to condemn. to be curious as to what's that person's story, where's the person's coming from, what has informed them to that position. So no, I did possibly push further to say, I don't get this. Where is this coming from? Work for the clarity, but not judge.
Yeah, that's well, curious was a word that's been used. Your curiosity was recognised and valued, I think, in this process. Another really interesting point about the methodology, I guess, and also this concept of intersectionality. So this was very specifically focusing on women, but of course there are lots of other ways in which, and forgive me, I forget the name of the contributor, but there was one person that talked particularly about working with Hispanic and Black women in the work that he was doing. Ryan, thank you. Was that something that you thought about in terms of trying to manage it and take account of other factors like class, race, etc.? Or did you just think, I'm just going to focus about women and see what comes out? Or did you do something different?
If I think of, as I said, I talk about the mosaic. My network, the people I know are a mosaic. But I did also have someone that did challenge me when I said I was going to write the book. She said, make sure you ask them about Black women as well, because our experiences are different. And I won't say I necessarily said to every person, what about women of color? But it was at the back of my mind, talking to people, making sure that I did have that rich diversity.
Yeah, it's fascinating. That came through for me in the book, actually, that there was the opportunity to touch on all sorts of other factors in your conversations. We've had another contribution from, let me just see, from Mark, who was really very specifically talking about his sector and recruitment and how important that whole recruitment process is. And actually, I was on another event recently where someone talked about the importance of that HR function and the recruitment process in particular as being a real gateway to inclusion or exclusion, depending on how that's how that manifests itself. So I think some really important stuff going on there. And also, let's have a look. Julian has also commented, really coming back to that structural level, thinking about how society is built. That's a big subject which you do tackle in the book. At the end of that whole process, Susan, were you more encouraged that we could collectively make some of those structural changes?
With awareness, because you mentioned the whole range of diversity. People talk a lot about unconscious bias. I don't think about unconscious bias. I think about embedded beliefs and embedded beliefs that impact or affect structures, institutions, the way we do things. And I believe the more we understand the beliefs that we have, our deep-rooted beliefs, the more we understand how society is structured to behave as certain people more than others, the more people understand that, the more we're able to make the changes. So I'm hopeful. I believe we've got a fair way to go, but at the same time, not as far as we might think if we have the correct conversations.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand back to Antonia just to probe you a little bit more about the book before we close. But I've certainly got a real sense from all of the contributors, from people who are joining the webinar, that there is a real appetite to want to do more. And Julian in particular is really very passionately talking about how he is personally happy to challenge and to talk to men and other men, even those who find it very difficult to have those conversations. And so I think that key message about all of us feeling better placed to have the conversations without judging, listening, by being curious is a really positive way to take the dialogue forward. So thank you everybody for contributing. I'm going to turn myself off now and hand back to Antonia, who has some more grilling questions for you, Susan.
Susan, I'm thinking, I mean, there's been some great responses, as Julie said. I'm thinking about you know, back to the purpose of the book and using the book, you know, how can the book be a tool either at the sort of individual or small group or pan organization level? So I'm interested to know how have you got some ideas about how the book can be used by men, for example?
Oh, I mean, I think the key thing is awareness.
Do you want to challenge my question? Do you want to challenge my question? Because I framed it, but I'm very happy that you know, you can come back and say, no, that's not how I'd start.
Or what I could do is, which is typical of me, is I could reframe my response, and and then you can come back to me afterwards if you think there are things missing for you. So for me, the starting point is reading the book, becoming more aware. And it's not an overnight thing, because we're all on a journey. Life is a journey. And with that journey, our awareness of self, awareness of others develops over time. The more we're open, the more aware we become. So there's something about, first and foremost, reading the book. There's something about using the book as an opening for conversations, both with other women, both with other men and with women as well. Even if it's not women at work to start with, you might have a female partner, a sister, a mother, brother, not brother, what have you. But it's a tool to create awareness and to start the conversation with people.
I was thinking about, you know, if I go back to, you know, consulting to organizations in organization effectiveness, you know, how could it be used in that sort of context? And I mean, I absolutely agree. You need to start by reading it. And actually, I don't know whether you need to read the whole book. I think you could, you know, you can at random choose 3 or 4 pieces, and, you know, get someone else to choose 3 or 4 pieces and exchange some ideas around that. I don't. It's the joy of the book is you don't have to do a cover to cover on it.
Yep. No, I would agree. I mean, and there are a number of people that have told me that they've started off by dipping in and seeing headlines that interest them and reading on the basis of those headlines, with the view to then be able to go back at a later stage and read through, and also highlighting bits and drawing on it and using it as a reference point going forward. I'm also keen to have conversations with people going forward, be it on a one-to-one basis, that man in a leadership position that has some awareness that there are things wrong, but doesn't fully understand, and wants someone who can help him navigate through. Could be, same applies to women, but also that group conversation as well.
Yeah. And I think you've actually made some connections to your website that help direct people, you know, to pick up the opportunity around that, haven't you?
I have, yes.
So, you know, big question. What are you going to do to follow this book up yourself, Susan? You know, is there a 4th book somewhere in the depths of your mind or heart?
I laugh when you say that, because I've got a list of books to write, and I might have finished this faster if we didn't have the focus on race, ethnicity that came up, which I had to spend some time reflecting on. And I do want to write a book on that subject. Could actually say 2, but specifically people on this call be aware that I might be speaking to you, because I will do something in a somewhat similar vein where I will have conversations with people from various backgrounds, black, white, what have you, alike, about their perspective on race and racism. So that's the next one that I've got planned. Be prepared.
I do think this is a place for you just to perhaps amplify some of your own thoughts and beliefs around mosaic, because you do bring, we've heard people talking about your listening and your curiosity and the, that humility that you bring to difficult, tough, sensitive conversations is potent. I know, last year you certainly supported me in a couple of activities regarding race at work, and that was really successful. Just give us a little bit more about your ideas around mosaic for those of us that don't know you very well.
I guess from when I was small, I was brought up with a very basic belief by my mom. Everyone is of value. Everyone has value. Everyone is important. It doesn't matter what they do. They might have a big job, leading a company, heading a state, or what have you. They're all important, but so is the person that is cleaning, doing something somewhere in a small corner. And if we didn't know that before, this pandemic has highlighted that, and I hope we never forget. So that is fundamental to who I am. I've carried that with me all my life. So everyone has value. The key is, how do we realize and optimize that value? And there are two parts: people recognizing the value that they bring, and other people recognizing the value people bring. And I guess it's in the title, The Value of Women. And as I said, it's one thing for women to recognize their value, and I think we do, as women, need to do that more. But the other part is other people seeing our value as well. And so that's why it's other people, men, talking about the value women bring. And the mosaic, it recognizes the rich diversity. I started talking about the mosaic with my second book, Consequences, Diverse to Mosaic Britain. And that's a recognition that we are diverse. There's no questioning of that. And don't want to become the same. That actually takes away the beauty. If you think of a mosaic art piece of art, is in our differences that come together to create something beautiful. But that only works when we recognize, when we look at our common values, our common purpose, our common interest, basically our common humanity that binds us together. And that really and truly is what the mosaic is all about. And so when I write, when I work with organizations, when I work with young people, it's all about the value and bringing out that value so everyone can play their part in the world that we live in.
Selah.
Thank you, Susan. That's a really fantastic point to end this part of the conversation on. As we've already said, we're starting the conversation, and it's been absolutely fascinating to just sit back and listen. Actually, it's been a real privilege for me, and I'm sure the other attendees to be able to do that. Some more great comments coming through. Yatunde has shared what they're going to do personally to make a difference. So your book is not just a dusty thing that's going to sit on the shelf. It's a call to arms, a call to action, and it's already getting those responses. You're going to love looking at all the comments and the questions and things afterwards. So that will be a joy. Sharif is sharing ideas for your next book. So you might think you know what you're going to do, but you're getting other helpful pieces of advice coming through from a really engaged audience today, which has been absolutely fantastic. I mean, Susan is encouraging all of us to join her mosaic journey, and you know, your final points there, Susan, really brought that to life, and together that we can kind of create that mosaic world, which, as you say, is a beautiful thing made up of all very different small parts. And I really hope for everyone that's joined us today has inspired you to want to find out more about that, and to want to do that more actively as part of your own world and your own life. If you haven't read the book, I do encourage you to read it and to share it with the men and women in your life as well. That will be a really fantastic way to amplify and expand the conversation. And I think Antonia managed to get Susan to do a Radio 2 style plug for the website, but do visit the mosaicworld.live website. There's more information on there, including the follow-up events that Susan has already planned. So more conversations, more dialogue, more opportunities to learn from each other and from the insights that Susan has aired in this book. Thanks again to Antonia for so skillfully sharing that conversation and forcing Susan to talk about herself and her work for a while, because we know that Susan's skill set is really getting other people to talk about themselves and their work. So it's been fantastic to hear from Susan personally around this. And thank you, Susan, for writing this wonderful book and for sharing it with us, and for going the extra, well done, Antonia, and for going the extra mile and setting up this webinar and you know, being open to have a discussion about it. It's been really fantastic. And thanks to our supporters who have made this event happen. So the South Central Institute of Technology, Milton Keynes Business Leaders Partnership, Women Leaders UK and Milton Keynes College. It's been fantastic that so many of you have joined us today on what is a beautiful early evening or morning or daytime, wherever you are in the world. And it's been really uplifting to hear from Susan, and also to see all the chats and the comments online. So thank you very much, everybody, for your time. And I look forward to perhaps even seeing you all in person at some point at one of Susan's events, or indeed other events around Milton Keynes and the wider world. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.